Can Americans restore confidence in the election system? What's one of the biggest lessons from the 2020 election as for the cause of lacking voter integrity? How to address people's concern over the voting machine? What's going to happen to H.R. 1 in Congress? Welcome to Sound of Hope News. I'm Cathy Zhang. These are some of the questions on so many people's mind. In this episode, I'll talk to Matt Braynard, the executive director of a nonprofit organization who's trying to tackle these issues. Matt Braynard is the former director of data and strategy for the Trump campaign. After the 2020 general election, he founded and led the Voter Integrity Project and discovered illegal ballots and other election anomalies. Matt and the 30-some former Trump for President campaign staffers formed this nonprofit organization called Look Ahead America. According to him, with America First agenda, this organization's #1 priority is registering to vote, educating, and turning out to vote for the quote-unquote disadvantaged patriotic Americans with blue-collar backgrounds. Its additional goal is fighting for patriotic causes at the state and the local level, one of which is voter integrity. So, Matt, indeed, voter integrity is on the minds of so many people since the last election. What is your organization doing in that regard?
We're doing several things on several different fronts. At the state legislative level, we have our policy objectives. And in every state in the country, we've got volunteers that are engaging with their state legislators, state senators, as well as their county governments on implementing the reforms that Look Ahead America has outlined. If these reforms were implemented, you could be completely confident that voter fraud just would not be possible. It would not be possible to cast any more absentee or illegal ballots that would cause anybody to have any doubts about the outcome of the election. The other thing that we're doing as an organization is working through states to try and sanitize their voter lists and remove people from those lists who do not belong. We have a number of techniques to do that, and we'll be bringing those to bear this year in the 3 states that are holding state elections, being Virginia, New Jersey, and Louisiana, and then next cycle, hopefully in all the other states. And again, as I mentioned before in Arizona, our plan is to, in all the states where we're active, is to implement the largest nationwide poll watching operation the country's ever seen.
You just announced a new project in Arizona focusing on voter registration drive and the community organization. Can you tell us more about it?
Our project in Arizona comes thanks to a significant gift of about $2 million from a gentleman named Jim Lehman. Jim Lehman is a clean energy entrepreneur. He built a massive business in Arizona that employs thousands of people there and across the country. He's also a U.S. military veteran, and he's also one of the few people on the right with significant ability to contribute who also recognizes the importance of voter registration efforts and community organizing, that this cannot be surrendered to the left, that we have to be engaged with it too. And thanks to his help, we're going to be doing it better than they ever have. Our plan for Arizona is to deploy 5 field offices, 25 staff, and countless volunteers to go into communities to find these disaffected patriotic Americans, get them registered to vote, give them reasons to vote, and then on election day, turn them out to vote. Further, as the election approaches, our volunteers and staff will become part of the most advanced and largest election monitoring and poll watching operation ever seen in the state of Arizona, so we can be confident of the outcome of the next election and to ensure voter integrity.
Yeah, so tell us why you choose Arizona as your first state to put on this effort.
The reason we chose Arizona was simple. It's because that's where our donor wanted it. But it's our hope that by demonstrating what we're capable of in the state of Arizona, donors in other states will insist that we come there and bring this production to them, because they'll see what difference we're making in Arizona, and they'll say that, look, I'm in Virginia and I can help fund something like that, or I and 5 or 10 of my fellow businessmen can help fund something like that, and we need to bring it here. So let's get the financing in order. And you know, it's a relatively inexpensive effort. Each one of our field offices with 4 staff and a complete team of volunteers and material and rent and everything like that costs less than $200,000 a year. It's a pretty significant investment. And you've got to keep in mind that when you invest with us, as opposed to, say, political campaigns, where you're only buying a vote, essentially, with us, you're buying and investing in a voter that has a much greater long-term investment, a long-term return, than just investing in some political campaign that may or may not win, and then it's poof, it's gone. So we're taking their dollars and turning them into new patriotic voters who are going to continue voting for generations to come, and it's a very good investment.
Yeah, Arizona is actually a focal point right now because of the Maricopa County audit. Matt, what is your take on what's going on there?
Well, I know that Maricopa did a very poor job running their elections. We've had individuals who insist not only did they not vote, they haven't even been in the state for years. Yet Maricopa County has them marked off as not just voting, but signature verified. So we've got to get to the bottom of what caused that and what's behind it and how endemic the problem is. I'm really curious about what the audit in Maricopa is going to discover, but more than just Maricopa, there are a lot of other counties in Arizona that run their elections much worse than even Maricopa does. So I would encourage them to expand the audit to those additional counties where I think we'll discover some potentially significantly bigger problems.
Matt, we know that you did a lot of data analysis to the last November's election result. So from your point of view, what is one of the biggest discoveries in terms of the cause of lacking voting integrity?
I think the biggest cause of illegal ballots isn't an organized effort or some nefarious cabal. What it really is people taking advantage of weak voter integrity enforcement in a given state and shopping their ballot to cast it wherever they want to cast it rather than where they actually lived. We determined that these voters were determinative in the outcome of the election in states like Georgia and Wisconsin and Arizona and many other states. So the real emphasis for us is ensuring voter integrity by authenticating absentee ballots, much greater list hygiene, getting rid of closed source voting equipment, and giving the state the resources they need and citizens the resources they need to be confident in the outcome of the elections and to make sure that any voter fraud or illegal ballots are prosecuted.
Right.
So how confident are you with regards to improving the voting integrity in different states?
I think every state is its own battleground for voter integrity. In some states, I've seen some very promising legislation. In Texas, I've seen legislation introduced that would require a thumbprint on the affidavit envelope. That was one of the leading policy recommendations that our organization has made, and one of the best ways to remove fraudulent absentee ballots from being cast. There are a few other pieces of legislation in states like Texas and Florida and others. All of the states are looking at it. We're tracking over 1,400 different pieces of legislation that are aimed at restoring integrity in the elections. Some of them are good, some of them are great, some of them are do nothing or even make the problem worse. But we're keeping an eye on it and making sure people are aware of what's happening in their states, as well as training them to be able to lobby and advocate at the county and state level for voter integrity, along with other patriotic causes.
So how do you think of the new voting law in Georgia, which raised so much controversy from the Democratic side?
The Georgia legislation, it doesn't cause any more problems, but it doesn't really solve too many more problems. And it doesn't have the kind of specificity that we really need to restore confidence. It takes a few steps in the right direction, sort of, but there's a lot of work left to be done. And there's no reason it can't be done. We've got time now. We've got the rest of this year. We've got next year's legislative session to fix these problems. And our efforts in Georgia and elsewhere are going to continue to focus in like a laser on solving these problems, identifying them, and calling out good legislation or bad legislation. And just making sure our volunteers and all of their friends and family and church members and anybody that's in their social circle is making their voice heard. And the more of the people there are making their voice heard, the harder it is for the state's legislature, state government to be able to ignore it. So in numbers, there are strength.
Matt, can you explain to us why you don't think the voting law in Georgia solves the real problem?
I think what's most important in the legislation in Georgia and elsewhere that sometimes it misses the mark is that they need to do a very aggressive job of sanitizing that voter list. They need to match it up against many other government databases like the National Change of Address database. And if somebody's matched to it, they should initiate a follow-up to determine whether or not that individual is still eligible to cast a ballot in that state. The other thing that I think it misses the mark on is it does not go nearly far enough in authenticating absentee ballots. I think the best way to do that is through a thumbprint on the affidavit envelope. That solves so many problems, such as double voting, people casting ballots that don't belong to them, ballot harvesting. All of those problems go away if you require a thumbprint on the affidavit envelope of an absentee ballot.
You mentioned the thumbprint legislation in Texas, which was based on the recommendation of your organization. Tell us more about it.
In Texas, legislation was introduced, not yet passed, but is being considered and has 5 or 6 very significant sponsors, co-sponsors, that would require an affidavit envelope of the absentee ballot to have that right thumbprint on it. And that solves so many problems. And, in other countries, they've used thumbprints to manage their voting systems to ensure integrity. In Korea, for example, you go to cast your ballot, you put your thumb on the scanner, you get your ballot, and it's done. You've got complete confidence that the person who's supposed to be casting that ballot has done so. It's very easy and inexpensive to do it via mail with absentee ballots, because remember, there really isn't anybody checking that ID when somebody casts a mail-in ballot. But with the thumbprint, it's very difficult, if not nearly impossible, to cheat on that. Because even if somebody is putting in thumbprints for multiple people, that will be detected. It's easy to detect, and it's also easy to match back. I have a 10-year-old cell phone. My 10-year-old cell phone unlocks with a fingerprint scanner. There's no reason that our election system can't be brought into the 21st century, even 20th century, when I think fingerprint dusting for that, matching had already started. So there's no reason we can't move forward and use this not really that new technology to secure our elections.
So talking about the election system, the voting machine has been the most concern for many people, especially after last year's election. So what's your take on it?
Well, a lot of people made accusations about what voting equipment machines were doing, and a lot of other people are skeptical about it. But what I think we can all agree on, though, whether you're on the left or right, Democrat or Republican, is that when the government buys a piece of election equipment, the government and the people should have the right to examine every part of that piece of equipment, to look at every line of software to see how it works. Unfortunately, that's not really permitted with almost every closed box, black box voting equipment vendor in the country. Not only does the government not know what's inside those machines, but they're forbidden by contract for attempting to open them up or to reverse engineer them or to try to reverse engineer the software that runs on them. This is inexcusable in a democracy. We should have a complete understanding of exactly how votes are counted, generated, tabulated, adjudicated using this equipment. And it's really a bipartisan issue because until just recently, it was the left that was leading the charge against these black box voting equipment. In fact, in the US Congress, somebody introduced legislation to outlaw it and require that all voting equipment be open source. That man's name was Rush Holt. He was a Democrat from the state of New Jersey. And his background wasn't as a pure politician who just worked his way up or a lawyer or something like that. By profession, he was a scientist, specifically a physicist. And I think that one way we can kind of move past all of the problems that people saw or don't believe happened or really happened in 2020 is with the agreement that all voting equipment must be open source. There's no excuse for there to be any secrets in any piece of equipment that's responsible for determining the outcome of an election.
Yeah, many people didn't realize the fact that all of the voting machines are black box, and the companies have their clients sign agreements not to disclose what's inside the machine. But do you know why they were allowed to do that in the first place?
Well, a black box voting equipment vendor has a lot of reasons for their business model. Because when you're a black box voting equipment vendor, not only you get to sell the equipment to a state, but you get an exclusive contract to service it, to repair it, to update it for as many as 20 years or even longer. Who knows how long these machines are going to be put in service. However, if it's open source, well, that opens the door for local businesses, less expensive options to maintain, update, and manage that equipment. So one of the reasons that black box voting equipment is, so pervasive is that the companies have a huge incentive to use it because it locks them in with a permanent service contract, no competition. Just think about that. It's a no-bid contract for updating, monitoring, repairing, fixing, doing all the kind of maintenance that these machines need, or even if a state changes how it conducts its elections, well, guess what? Those machines all have to be reprogrammed. So that's a constant stream of revenue for a corporation. They don't really want to let that go, but they have to for the good of the country.
Mm-hmm. So what does it take to have such change, for example, on the state level, local level, and the federal level?
So the fight against black box voting equipment, the fight to require all election systems to be open source, it's a fight that we're having on multiple levels. In some cases, counties are making decisions on what kind of voting equipment to use. In other cases, it's states. So on both of those levels, we've had some success. We've had some success in the Clark County in Ohio, getting them to press the pause button on purchasing black box voting equipment and to consider other options. In Louisiana, we've also been successful in pressuring the state government to hold off on a $100 million purchase of black box voting equipment. And we're in regular contact with people down there to encourage them to make the requirement that any system they move forward with is open source. Then the federal government itself could pass a law that would require all voting equipment to be open source, but it's not really friendly territory for us right now, though maybe someday it will be again.
Yeah, talking about the federal level, H.R. 1 is really on the minds of a lot of people who are concerned about voter integrity and what's going to happen down the road. What do you think?
H.R. 1 looks like it's dead because it does not look like the filibuster is going to be repealed anytime soon, but there's other ways that in theory it could sneak through. H.R. 1 is a massive piece of legislation. It's been around for a couple of years under different names, and it's changed, and most people aren't even aware of everything that's in it. Not only does it affect how voting takes place, it affects and takes away from the state legislatures and state governments the ability to draw their own lines for state legislatures or the U.S. Congress. It has a lot of other little nasty things in it, such as allowing a politician running for federal office to take campaign contributions and put them straight in their personal pocket. Historically, politicians have gone to jail for this, but H.R. 1 is going to legalize that. And again, it's not a topic that people really discuss, but it's in the legislation. And it's just a monstrous bill that has a lot of really horrific things in it, going well beyond just things that affect our voting systems and our voting process in every state.
Mm. So is there anything people should do or can do in regards to H.R. 1?
There's really nothing to be done about H.R. 1. It appears for now to be dead in the Senate. Although one or two, senators could change their mind and decide to get rid of the filibuster and pass it. But the reality is that there's pretty much nobody left to convince. Either they're for it or they're against it, and they're not changing their minds. So the only way to really change the likelihood of a bill like H.R. 1 passing is to change the members of Congress and the Senate. And we're not going to get to vote on that until November of 2022.
That's right.
Finally, for our audience who might be interested in learning more about your organization or getting involved, how can they go about it?
The best way to get involved is to go to lookaheadamerica.org. And what we need more than anything else are volunteers and contributions. Apart from our contribution in Arizona, we're a pretty lean operation. Most of our contributions are $5, $10, or $25. Everything that somebody can give helps. Somebody's able to make a monthly contribution, that helps. But we also need volunteers. So whether you can donate or volunteer, there's really no excuse for you not to be involved. So please go to lookaheadamerica.org and either volunteer, contribute, or both. And we'll be very grateful for anything you can do for us.
All right.
That's Matt Braynard with Look Ahead America. What do you think of the issues he touched upon? Feel free to share your comments below. If you like this video, please click like and share it. I'm Cathy Zhang with Sound of Hope News. See you next time.